Good morning, friends. It is another beautiful morning here in northern Iowa. It is not yet 6 o'clock and it's about 62 degrees. So it's beautiful to be out here in the garden, and I'm going to show you something that's not so fun for me and the kids here in the garden. And I'm going to show you a lot of fun things. I'm going to answer some questions that I got over on Instagram, and we're going to see if we can keep this under 30 minutes. So here's what I'm going to show you that's not so fun. We have so many of these potato beetle larvae on our potato plants. Now there's not so many potato beetle larvae that we can't just walk along and pick them off. It's not a favorite job, so the kids kind of complain. I pay them for every beetle, for every larva they pick off. My grandma used to dust her potatoes with 7, and some people use diatomaceous earth, but I have 5 rows of potatoes, and the beetles aren't that bad on them. It's easier just to pick them off than to dust them all with diatomaceous earth. But now I'm gonna show you something fun about potatoes. So this first row here is my red Norland variety, and they are a short season and they're not really a keeping potato. So you can just reach under. See what I can find. Oh yeah, look at that. So you can just reach under your plant. Oh, Susie, that's not for you. Go away. Susie. So you can just dig out a few potatoes and leave the rest of the plant intact while it finishes growing its baby potatoes. Now, I have not yet told the family that these potatoes are ready. They would much rather eat these than what we had been eating. But we have some store-bought potatoes that we have to finish before we get to eat these potatoes. So I've not yet told them that there's yummy baby potatoes ready in the garden. So one of the questions was, how do you know when to harvest potatoes? So a general rule of thumb is once they've bloomed, you can expect to find potatoes under them. Now, you should not dig them for fresh eating if they still look, you should not dig them for keeping, for storing, if they look like this. As the plant matures, it takes all of its energy down into its roots, which in potatoes, the roots are the potatoes. So the plant's gonna die back, and it's taking all that energy down into the potatoes for overwintering. So the plant wants to survive the winter, so it takes all its energy from its foliage down into its roots, and you don't want to harvest the potatoes for storing, like for winter keeping, until the greens are completely dead. So then we dig them out for keeping, like for storing for winter eating. And that's usually here, I think September, October. We sometimes don't dig them, you don't have to. Once the potatoes are dead, once the foliage is dead, the potatoes fine under the ground. I actually like to keep them under the ground for a while. I feel like they cure and they harden under the ground just as well as out of the ground. But once they've flowered, you can dig in underneath there like I showed you, and you can get some potatoes for fresh eating, because let me tell you, those baby potatoes have such a smooth and buttery flavor that you will be digging after some more baby potatoes. Next thing I'm going to talk about is peas. I had a lot of questions about the variety of peas we planted, because on Instagram yesterday I showed us picking peas and shelling peas. One of the questions about peas was how to get your family to help you. They set their alarms. I tell them usually a day or two before, hey, on Monday it's going to be time to pick peas. And peas are one of those things, you can maybe push them for a day or two, but you don't want to push them off too long because they're going to be old and then they get bitter. You want to harvest them at just the right point. And these probably should have been picked Saturday or Sunday, but it didn't work for those days. So I knew that Monday morning has to be the day we pick peas. So I told them, hey, you guys need to meet me in the garden at 6 a.m., set your alarms. And then I was ready with buckets and everything, and I was out here, and they came out here and helped, and it probably took us 45 minutes. My husband and I we send Mitchell and Hadassah down the row kind of ahead of us on one side, and then we came on the other side, and this way we could pick what they missed. And if you've ever picked peas, you know that peas are hard to spot. Like, peas are hard to pick. They're hard to pick for me. They're hard for my children to see. My husband is probably the best picker, and my daughter Stacy, she was the best pea picker, but the rest of us, we kind of say we're pea blind. They're kind of the same color as the vines. They're just not easy to pick. So my husband and I kind of went behind the children and picked what they missed. And yeah, the three little boys, they didn't even get out of bed, but they helped shuck them, and they sat with us until we were all done shucking. So that is how we get peas picked, or anything that is too much for one person to pick. If it's just, a row or so, I don't mind coming by myself and picking them. It's kind of peace and quiet, and I don't mind that. But when we have a lot, we definitely get the kids involved. And one of the questions was, why do you have to shell them? Can't you just, preserve them, pod and everything like snap peas? There is a very distinct difference between varieties. Snap peas are, let's see if I can show you. With snap peas, the pod is real tender and juicy, and the whole thing is good to eat. And there's maybe 2 or 3 small peas inside each pod, maybe 5. And then with the varieties that are made for shelling, like your whole peas, you will know right away when you bite into it that that pod is not for eating. It's stringy and tough. It does not have the same flavor. It tastes stringy and tough, but the peas that are inside, they're actually good to eat. So there is a difference in variety. Make sure, if you want whole peas, that variety is a whole pea, because if you're trying to whole the snap peas, you're not going to get very many peas, because there's not near as many inside of each pod as there is with the varieties that are actually whole peas. Like this one, I'm going to open it up. And when we sit around and shuck peas, the kids always have a contest to see who can find the pod with the most peas in it. And you can even see how thin the shell is here when I hold it up to the sun. And I'm gonna hold up a snap pea and see what that shell looks like in the sun. Okay, so it doesn't look to be much different when I hold it up to the sun, but you can see that it didn't open up near as well either. Like the pod is just much thicker and juicier. You'll know when you bite into them if it's a whole pea or a snap pea. Now, the whole peas that I am really loving the last couple years are the Penelope variety. And the snap peas, I don't even know, because we just plant those for snacking and fresh eating. Now, the Penelope peas have gotten much taller the last 2 years. Probably before that too, I just don't remember. Much taller than our 2-foot chicken wire. The variety that I was planting before the Penelopes used to come up to the 2-foot chicken wire and they'd be good. But next year, I'm actually gonna have to put these on something much taller because, let me show you. So here you can tell how they have just fallen over because they got so much taller than the fence that they just fell down, and they're taking the fence down with them. So it's a very tall variety of pea. So I have 2 50-foot rows of Penelope peas, and those rows are double. So I took my seeder and I planted the rows about 3 inches apart, and then I set my fence in between those 2 rows. It was about 2 pounds of pea seeds gave me these 2 50-foot rows of peas, and so far we have 5 very large quart bags, or very full quart bags of peas in the freezer. And when we're done with these, so we picked them once, we will likely pick them at least 1 more time, maybe 2. It all depends on the weather. If the weather gets real hot, they'll all get ready and we'll be able to pick all of them. Then we'll pull the pea plants out and the pigs and cows will eat the peas, and then I'll work the ground again and we'll put our green beans in, because I don't have enough room to put green beans in right away in the spring. So the green beans go in after my peas. Now, to grow enough of peas so that my family can eat peas as often as they'd like, I would probably need at least another 2,000 square feet of garden, if not more. Traditionally, or oftentimes in Mennonite homes or Mennonite gardens, your corn, you have a different area for your corn. You kind of have a corn garden, because corn is another thing that takes up lots of room. But if I make another garden, I have 4 more edges to control, and I don't like controlling my edges. Like, the prairie just wants to take over here and it'll grow in, and so I'm kind of just struggling through it the best we can. We don't grow a lot of peas because I don't have room for a lot of peas. So peas are a special occasion vegetable at our house, and we just kind of make it work the way we do, because I'm too lazy to start another garden and have 4 more edges of perimeter to control. Which this brings me to a question: weed control, pest control, not like bugs, which I'll talk about that too. But I get a lot of questions about moles and voles, and how do you keep rabbits and deer from your garden? So talking about edge control is weed control. I always say edge control is weed control, but not only the edge. And I promise I'm working on a YouTube video to show you how I do my edges, and it's just edges aren't my favorite thing, so I keep pushing it off. But here behind me, here you can see how I've kept up with these edges. That is called edge control. That is what I'm after on all 4 perimeters of these 2 plots, because the grass is not growing in. Anyway, Talking about weed control, one of the biggest things for weed control is watch the perimeter of your garden. If you have wild, overgrown weeds or bush around your garden, you're going to have a weed problem, because those weeds drop their seeds and those seeds go everywhere, even in your garden. So about there where the fence is, from there on out used to be just overgrown with ragweed and water hemp and red roots and all those weeds, and they get taller than me. And I had so much of a battle with weeds, because every fall those would all drop their seeds and they just go all over my garden. So it didn't even matter how weed free I kept my garden, I was battling the bush. So when I'm talking about edge control, I'm also talking about the perimeter of your garden. You've got to keep that trimmed up and weed free, so that you're not having those seeds come into your garden. Seeds that you shouldn't even have to be responsible for. It's just a losing battle. But you can control the weeds much better in your own little plot. I'm showing you my peas over here, because that is very weedy right now, and I'm just leaving it because just soon I'm gonna pull all the peas out, and then I can take care of all those weeds there before I plant my green beans. So it doesn't matter how much you keep your garden weed free. If you have weed seeds, if you have weeds going to seed around the perimeter of your garden, you're gonna battle those weeds next year. And like Grandma used to say, 1 year of seeds, like 1 year if your weeds go to seeds, you're gonna battle those weeds for 7 years. The other thing is moles and voles and rodents like that. They love to hide in tall grasses and weeds and things like that. So if the perimeter of your garden is grown up with tall grasses, those moles and voles are living in there and coming to your garden for snacks, because they can just scurry through that and they don't have to go through the open. I know they dig under the ground too, but you really will have more of a problem with if you have unkept perimeters. I used to have a lot more vole and mole problems before we started grazing all this pasture land around here, around the garden. So another trick, if you have moles and voles and rabbits and deer, and even raccoons, like if you have sweet corn, you probably know why I bring up raccoons. Raccoons love sweet corn. Take dog hair or human hair and sprinkle it along your rows. Usually peas, when they're little, are susceptible to rodents, because they like to come and nibble on the short little pea sprouts. But take your dog hair or human hair and sprinkle it along the row, and that has worked wonders for us. Same with raccoons. When my sweet corn is ready, or like when it starts forming cobs, because you know how raccoons like to come and get the sweet corn right before, like a couple days before you're ready to harvest it. I'll have the boys urinate around the perimeter of the sweet corn, because that seems to deter the raccoons, along with sprinkling dog hair and human hair. That has even kept deer away for me. Now, funny story. Years ago, before I had 4 boys and 5 dogs, I needed some hair to put on my garden because the rabbits were eating my peas. And yeah, anyway, so I went to a local barber shop and I said, this is gonna sound really, really odd, but could you sweep up some hair clippings for me for my garden? And the barber was like, sure. And no, it's not odd. People come to my door for hair clippings all the time for their gardens. And I was so relieved that I was not the only odd person that is sprinkling, other humans' hair around the perimeter of their garden. But now I have 5 dogs and 4 boys. There is no shortage of hair to deter pests from my garden. So if you have moles and voles and you can find their holes and their tunnels, just stuff human and dog hair into it, and they may move out. They may just make other tunnels because that's how they are, but chances that they move out, there's also a chance that they're just gonna leave, and that would be awesome. Now, I have noticed up here that I have something digging in my garden, like I can feel when I walk on it that it's tunnels, but I'm pretty sure it's a mole because moles eat grubs and insects that are under the ground. They are not herbivores, so they're not actually after the roots and the plants. And I haven't seen anything that tells me that it's a vole eating at the root or coming up and eating at the plant. So that's why I'm pretty sure that it's a mole. So one of the questions was, do I rotate crops? And how do I know where to put what? So part of the reason I have two different garden plots separated by this real thin strip of grass, used to be wider here, but then our garden keeps growing, so that strip is tinier than it used to be. Bugs, like potato bugs, who will go down in the soil and overwinter there in the soil. My potatoes, I like to move them from one plot to the other. And then last year my peas had aphids. And they were up here beside the strawberries, so I moved them to the other plot. And then the other thing is I usually try to put my corn where the tomatoes were, because I always put a lot of compost on my tomatoes, and the corn wants a real rich soil. So I try to put the corn where the tomatoes were, and you can see down here, my tomatoes were out here at the edge of the garden, and definitely that corn looks better than it does up here where the tomatoes were not. So those are the only two things I try to keep in mind when I rotate my crops, is where were the bugs last year, and which crops are a heavy feeder, and where did I have my tomatoes, because that's where I want to put those. Now with this arch being permanent, my cucumbers will probably always go here, which could become an issue with cucumber beetles. And I'm going to turn you around and show you my arch here. So what I have on my arch is, this is a Scarlet runner bean, and this was gifted to me by an Instagram follower, and I'm so excited to see how it does. And then here in the center of the arch, I have cucumbers. So we don't usually suffer too early in the year with cucumber beetles. So once my plants have a real healthy start, like these cucumbers here, I don't worry too much about the beetles, because we don't get that many beetles that they really can take a toll. The plant can usually outgrow any damage. But I need only say that, and then it'll be a terrible cucumber beetle year. But I have yet to lose a cucumber crop to beetles. And I don't have any squash this year. Like I said, my garden is just not quite big enough. Last year I had zucchini, and I canned some pineapple zucchini, and we used that like we would pineapples, and that is on my Instagram, that recipe is. And I still have some left, so we don't really need zucchinis. So I don't have a lot of problems with squash borers and things like that, because I don't have any squash in my garden. And winter squash, those take up a lot of room, and the boys wanted watermelons this year, so I put watermelons in instead of winter squash. And our daughter, who is the one that really loves like acorn squash and spaghetti squash, things like that, she is actually away at school and won't be here to miss the squash. So yes, we did make the garden bigger this year, but I don't actually feel like I gained any room for veggies, because I put all these zinnias in, and then I have flowers on my arch. I have some Thunbergia on my arch, and then I have zinnias here, and I have those sunflowers down there. But a story that I wanted to tell you was, couple years ago when I turned 40, one of my children looked at me, and we were in the barn doing chores, and I think we had probably just added some more animals. And so the child says to me, I think you should slow down, Mom. I mean, you're 40 now, and you're headed towards the end of your life. And I said, child, you ain't seen nothing yet. All you've seen was me having babies, nursing babies, adopting babies, and you haven't seen what your mother is capable of when she's not nursing babies or pregnant or focusing on bonding with adopted babies. So for years, my garden was food only. Like, that's all I had space for, because that's all I had time for. So now that the boys are older and a little more capable of doing things themselves, and they're not needing me so much, I finally get to play around in my garden a little more than I have in years past, or probably than I have ever before in my life. Now, the one piece of advice that my mother gave me when we added the 3 little boys to our family, she said, a small, well-tended garden will and can produce just as much food as a large, overgrown, weedy garden. So she helped me be comfortable with downsizing, even though our family had grown and our food needs were going to be more. She helped me be comfortable with downsizing my garden to the point where it was manageable. And you know what? She was right. My garden was small, and I kept it just where I could manage it, where it wasn't overwhelming, and I had a successful harvest. And then what happened is I felt good about the garden. I wasn't overwhelmed about it. It made me feel good and successful. So then I was inspired for next year's garden. So I'm gonna pass on that same advice to you, is if your garden is overwhelming, it's too large. Hang on, I gotta scold the dogs. So as I was saying, if your garden is too large, if your garden is overwhelming, it's probably too large, which means that you need to downsize so that your garden makes you feel good, because you're not gonna wanna repeat something that wasn't successful or that you didn't feel successful in. So downsize it to the point where you can manage it and keep it weed free, and you will feel much, much better about it. And next year will be more fun because you'll have all those good memories about how good your garden made you feel. So then each year we added a little more, because I'm like, oh, I managed that one just fine last year. I bet I can add a little more. So each year we added a little more, and this is where we're at now. Oh, that sun has come up. And I probably should go find my milk cow and get chores done, since it's a VBS at our church this week. We need to hustle around in the mornings, but I want to leave you with that. I didn't garden like this when my babies were little. I had a smaller garden. So make your garden small enough so you can manage it, and so that it makes you feel good. If it's not making you feel good, cut down on your size, on the size of your garden, until you can manage it well. Will we add more garden next season? I don't know. I don't know. Thank you everybody for watching. I gotta go find my milk cow. I don't hear her up here anywhere. She's probably all the way down in the back 40. But thank you everybody. These garden tours have been so fun. I never get as many questions answered as I think I will, because I start rambling. But thank you very much.